My Name is Tani, Chapter 16 to 19. 16. Worn Out Welcome. Aloud. We are safe here, I said, when Audiobook first spoke of returning alone to Nigeria. Why go back? You are right, he said. We are safe. We can sleep with 2 eyes closed in Dallas. There is no Boko Haram to trouble us. But being safe is not the same as being fully alive. We have no power here. There is no chance of working, and all I am doing is sleeping, eating, and waiting for bed. I cannot live this life. I knew that I could not argue with him, and I knew that he was right, so I did not try. I need to work, he said. That is why I must return. Let me sell the machines and the property. Then when I return, we will have money to hire a lawyer who can help us get work permits. But it is not safe there. I will stay with my brother. I will only go out at night. And I will not go anywhere near the shop. I promise, Aloud, I will manage myself and be careful. And this is the only way. If we want to try and make a home here, I have to return and sell everything. It is the only way. I did not like it, but I agreed with him. My uncle took a different view. He told him that he should not travel back, that leaving the country was a mistake. Stay here and rest, he said. Audiobook looked at my uncle. Rest? The word was like a cancer to him. 1 month after we arrived in America, Audiobook returned to Nigeria. Within a few days of me standing at the bus station in Dallas, wiping tears from my face as I waved goodbye, things changed in the house. The first sign was easy to ignore. One of my uncle's granddaughters stopped calling me auntie and started calling me by my name. Not a big deal, but I never heard her address my uncle or his wife by their names. The way she said it, and the way she stared at me defiantly, I knew that it was deliberate and that it was meant as a sign of disrespect. I was unable to sleep at night, so I put it down to me being tired and stressed and to my uncle's grandkids not being used to sharing their home with people. I told myself that it was nothing to bother about and that she was just being a kid. Sunday came around, and I made sure that the boys and I were smartly dressed and ready to go to church as usual. When it was time to go and I heard Grandma and Uncle at the front door, I hurried out and warmly greeted her. How are you, Grandma? Did you sleep well? Can I help you with your bags? She did not look at me. I thought maybe she was tired like I was, so I carried on. I like the dress you are wearing. I've not seen that before. Nothing. Are we going to church now, Grandma? Shall I call the boys out? It was as if I were a ghost. She walked back into the kitchen, leaving me standing there, confused. I stared at my uncle, hoping for an explanation. I'm sorry, he said. I did not tell you earlier that you will not be able to go to church with Grandma. Is she unwell? What? Oh, yes. She just needs to rest. You should too. My response was to get up earlier in the morning, find even more cleaning tasks to take on, and make sure that whenever I saw Grandma in the morning, I was even more polite and respectful than usual. Most of the time, she would flash me a half smile, tell me that she was fine, and hurry on through to whichever room I was not in. But 2 or 3 days after the church incident, she finally spoke to me. When is he coming back? I had just returned from walking the boys to school and was confused by her question. Did she mean Tani or Austin? Your husband. When is he coming back? When do you plan on moving out? The words were piling up in my head like storm clouds. In the week before Audiobook left, we had tried to sit down with her and my uncle to explain our plan for Audiobook to return within a month or so, for the 2 of us to find work, and then for the 4 of us to move out within a few more months. But Grandma had told us that she was too busy to talk, and my uncle told us not to worry. Standing in the living room, missing Audiobook more than ever, I tried to explain the plan to Grandma. But before I even finished my first sentence, she lost interest. She turned on the TV and shook her head. I crept out of the room. Later I told my uncle. He said I should not worry about any of it. Having grown up in Nigeria, my belief is that when someone like an uncle or a parent tells you not to worry, there really is no point in worrying. Their job is to protect you. Their job is to make sure all is well. Your job is to trust them and do what they say. But I worried all the same. After that, things worsened. I started trying to avoid Grandma as much as possible. If she was in the house when the boys were at school, I would stay in the bedroom. Only when I'd heard the front door open would I peer through the window to see her leave. Then I would let myself out. Food became an issue as well. The milk and various other supplies that I'd bought and shared with everyone were suddenly relocated to a separate shelf in the fridge. When her grandkids were hungry and shouting for her to make them a snack, I'd offer them some of the rice I'd made, but they'd refuse. Bit by bit, any sign that we were family was wiped away. I did not like it at all, and I started to wonder if it was my fault. In the hours I would spend each day lying on the bed, waiting for Grandma to leave, I went over the same two questions. Am I the one causing all this? Was it a mistake to come to Dallas? I never found an answer. I tried to keep my troubles away from my uncle. He hadn't been looking well when we arrived, and as we entered the second week of Keod's trip, he started to look worse. He was taking his own advice and resting as much as possible, but it did not appear to be helping. For me, some days were harder than others. If the boys were finding it tough and Tani had been crying because of something Damien or Terrell said or did, I'd feel worse. The guilt would be heavier, and the feeling of being trapped would be stronger. Keod and I spoke on the phone when we could. He was worried about us all, but we both knew that the best thing he could do to help us in Dallas was dedicate himself to selling everything and returning to us as soon as possible. So most of the time I did not talk about things like the fridge or the grandkids being disrespectful or Grandma being rude. I wanted to hear about him, to know that he was keeping safe and that he was happy with the way the sales were all progressing. But one day it all felt like too much. When Keod and I spoke on the phone, within moments he sounded concerned. I knew he could hear the stress in my voice. "What is wrong?" he asked. The words came at the same time as the tears. "If you are loved, even if you are drinking only water, you will be fine," I answered. "But to be somewhere without love, you cannot be happy. It is tough here. It is hard. There is no love. They are getting tired of us."
17. Sorry goes a long way. Tani. Our cousins in Dallas liked Austin more than they liked me. If he was in the living room when they were in there, they didn't mind so much. They even let him play video games with them. But if I even walked past them and touched them by accident, they'd start yelling that I wasn't allowed out of the bedroom and should go back there right now. It wasn't just me that they shouted at. They shouted at each other a lot. Sometimes they even shouted at Mom, even though she never did anything wrong. I was confused about it all. It didn't make sense that young people talked to adults like this, or that family didn't feel like family. One night when I was going to bed, I said to Mom that I didn't understand what was going on. She smiled at me and said, "It's fine. Families are different, that's all. But we love each other, right?" I thought for a moment. Mom always tells us, sorry goes a long way, and let sorry be always in your mouth. So I asked, but do they say sorry to you for getting mad at you when you haven't even done anything? Mom shook her head. She waited a while, like she was trying to find the right words. But we can still forgive, can't we? I wanted to say no and then go to sleep, but I knew she was right. Mom's always right about that kind of thing.
18. From bad to worse. Aloud. Things in my uncle's house continued to worsen. But it wasn't just the fact that Grandma could erupt at any time and accuse me or the boys of anything from stealing her things to upsetting her children and grandchildren. What made life particularly difficult was the fact that she could also be nice. She could be polite, warm, and hospitable, just like she had been when we first arrived. But then, without warning, her mood could turn. You never knew what you were going to get. Ever since Keod had returned to Nigeria, Grandma's moods had been getting more and more extreme. I tried being even more polite and respectful, and I tried waking up even earlier and cleaning even more of the house, but nothing worked. Grandma still flicked between moods as if there were a faulty switch somewhere inside her. The only thing I found that worked was keeping quiet and avoiding her as much as possible. If she couldn't see me or the boys, I hoped that Grandma's anger would find a different target. Not long after Kaode returned home, I met a woman from Nigeria named Remy. She worked with one of Grandma's daughters at a local hospital, and I had been talking on the phone to her about settling down in America. She was the first person who ever told me about claiming asylum and getting work permits and green cards. Thanks to her advice, we were able to take our first steps and begin applying. From time to time, Remy would offer to come and visit me at the house so we could talk more freely, but I always tried to avoid it. Something told me that if she came to the house, Grandma would not be happy about it. Just a few days after the boys and I had been accused of stealing from Grandma, when Kaode had been gone for a month, Remy called one evening when I was about to tell Tani to get ready for bed. She sounded bright and happy, just like she always did. "I'm in the neighborhood and I'm coming over. I've got apple juice and cookies. I know where the house is, so I'll see you in 10, okay? Bye." I panicked. Before I could find my voice, Remy had ended the call. I found my uncle in the front yard and told him that a friend was about to come over. He looked almost as anxious as I felt. "You've got to tell her," he said, nodding toward the living room. I knew exactly who he meant. "Excuse me, Grandma," I said quietly as I stood inside the doorway. "I have a friend who wants to visit and say hi this evening. Would that be okay with you?" "Sure," she said, barely lifting her eyes from the TV but waving her hand and half smiling. No problem. That's okay." I didn't want Remy knocking on the door and disturbing Grandma, so I waited outside in silence with my uncle. We were both nervous. I think we both feared what was coming. In the end, it was fine. Remy arrived, and we all walked into the living room, where she told Uncle and me about how she had been able to get her citizenship. It was helpful, and Grandma even got up and came to say hi. We drank some of the juice, ate some of the cookies, and then, 15 minutes after she arrived, Remy left. The next morning, at 6:22 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Grandma. "Don't you ever invite another woman to my house? That's disrespectful. If you disrespect me again, you're out." Even though my uncle had left Nigeria when I was a baby, and I had never met him face to face until we arrived in Dallas, I loved him greatly. He and my mother had been close, and she would talk about him all the time when I was young. She'd tell us how he was a kind, gentle man, how he did not like conflict and did not get angry. He was a man of peace, and the pleasure I took from living in his house was often enough to outweigh the sadness and frustration caused by his wife and grandchildren. But the longer we stayed in Dallas, the more aware I became of how little I really knew my uncle. For example, I knew that he had been ill before we arrived. When we were back in Nigeria, he had told me about having surgery on his stomach. But it was not until I saw him with his shirt off one morning that I realized how many times he had been operated on. His belly had 5 or 6 different scars on it, some as long as my finger. He laughed when he saw me looking and changed the subject when I tried to get him to tell me what exactly was wrong with him. I knew nothing about how Uncle and Grandma had met, nothing about what life had been like for him in America. Whenever I asked him, he gave me vague answers and not much more. I tried to get him to talk by showing him photographs from old family albums, but he only glanced at them, smiled vaguely, and moved on. It was strange, but Grandma was a lot more curious about these photos than he was. More than once she and I spent 20 or 30 minutes sitting side by side in the living room, swiping in silence through the photos I had saved on my phone. His past and his scars were mysteries. However, he could not hide everything from me. One afternoon, I returned from walking Tani and Austin home from school to see him standing outside in the front yard, speaking on the phone. It was November and cold, but he was wearing just a thin undershirt and pants that looked as though they had been torn by a dog. The closer I got, the worse he looked. His pants weren't just torn, they were stained with blood as well. And his arms were cut and bleeding where patches of skin had been scraped off. His shirt was lying on the ground. He didn't look up as we approached. He was too busy talking on the phone. I stood close to him and waited for him to finish his call. What happened? I asked when his trembling hands had finally been able to put the cell phone in his pocket. He looked at me as though he were surprised to find me there. Oh, he said, smiling and brushing some dirt from his trousers. I fell out of a tree. I'd almost forgotten that the boys were with me when Tani held out a hand and pointed at the road. Which tree did you fall out of, Uncle? Was it that big one there? Or the tall, skinny one by the garage? Uncle shook his head, but Tani continued, listing all the trees he could think of in the neighborhood. If you tell me, then I will know which one, and I'll be careful not to climb it myself. Austin took Tani inside, and I was left staring. My uncle bent down to pick up his shirt but fumbled it, so I helped him put it back on. It seemed to me that he must have aged 10 years in 10 days. What happened? I asked again. He said, his voice trailing off as he looked back at the house then up and down the road. He took a step toward me and lowered his voice. We had a fight. I wanted to ask all the questions that were shouting in my head, but I knew I needed to keep quiet and let him tell me in his own time. We were in the house, arguing. She was mad and said she needed to get away. I didn't want her to drive angry, so I followed her out to the driveway. I opened the passenger door and was trying to persuade her to get out of the car and come back inside and talk some more, but she just ignored me. She started reversing back down the driveway. But the door was still open, and it caught me and pulled me with it. I got dragged all the way to the road. Didn't she stop? Did she help you at all? He shook his head. No, but listen, it was an accident. I don't think she saw me at all. Where did she go? I don't know, but I know she'll be back. We both stood in silence for a while. Eventually, I couldn't hold the question in any longer. Uncle, what were you fighting about? This time he didn't look back to the house or along the street. He just looked right at me, his old, sad eyes full of defeat and pain. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Was it us? Was that what you were arguing about? He shook his head, but we both knew he was lying. I smiled and gave him a hug. It's okay, Uncle. He smiled a little, then shuffled inside. I walked behind him. By the time we reached the kitchen, I had decided something. I did not want their marriage to suffer because of us, so the next time I spoke with Keod on the phone, I would have to tell him that we needed to leave.
19. Moving again. Keod. It took less than 30 seconds for my life to be transformed by Aloud. I was 26 years old, standing with a friend in the market in my home city of Ado Ekiti, showing him the car I had recently purchased. It was a 2-year-old Toyota Camry that gleamed brilliant white in the midday sun, and my friend was impressed. My eyes were elsewhere. I was looking at the beautiful young woman who was walking in the market with her sisters. The way she floated from one stall to another. The easy laugh that ignited so many smiles on the faces of the passers-by. And those eyes. I was under her spell in an instant. "Prince," said my friend from inside my car. "Prince, what is it?" "Look," I said. "Do you see that girl with the headscarf over there?" "Yes." "Oh, wow." I knew right then, at that very moment, that she was the greatest woman on the face of the earth. So when I next spoke, not a single note of doubt was in my voice. I am going to marry her. With that, I walked over to her. I threw my chest out and held my head high, all a bluff to hide the nerves inside. I greeted her with a smile. She was even more beautiful up close than she was from a distance. For a second, my words stuck in my throat. She returned my smile, and I found my voice. I looked her in the eye and let my words fill the air. "A day will come when you will be my wife." She laughed. But it was not a cold laugh, or one that sent me away. It was warm, as if the idea filled her with as much joy as it did me. That was in July. We started spending time together, and soon she took me home to meet her father. The fact that he was a Muslim and I was a Christian did not cause any conflict. In fact, it hardly came up. He asked about my job, and I told him I was a printer. He explained that he was an accountant at one of the biggest presses in the town, and we became immediate friends. Before too long, I proposed to Aloud, and almost 1 year after I first saw her in the market in Ado Ekiti, she became my wife. Our wedding celebration was more like a carnival. It lasted 3 days, and more than 1,500 people attended. My life had never felt so blessed. Leaving Aloud and the boys to return to Nigeria was not easy, and I was anxious to get back to them as soon as possible. When I finally did make the long journey back to America, the welcome at the bus station in Dallas was not like the first welcome we all received when we arrived in June. It was dark, and the wind was cold, and there was no grandma smiling and waving. There was no uncle either. There were just my wife and my 2 boys. I did not mind. They were the only people I needed. But the joy of being reunited with my family and the relief at having successfully completed my task was short-lived. Aloud had already prepared me by telling me there was trouble at home. By the time we went to bed that night and Aloud had finished telling me in her quietest voice about the changes that had taken place, I had no misunderstanding about how bad things had become. She told me all about what happened when Grandma had driven away and caught Uncle in the car door, how Grandma went missing for 5 days, and how she had returned just 2 days before I did. As soon as she had walked back into the house, she told Aloud the new rules that she had decided to introduce. The boys were no longer allowed in the living room. If they were not in their bedroom, they could only be in the kitchen or the bathroom. If Aloud or I were to go for a walk in the evening or on the weekend, we could not leave the boys at home. They would have to come with us. And no visitors. No touching any food in the refrigerator that we did not buy ourselves. The rules left me feeling confused, but the knowledge that, even though Aloud had done everything possible to protect him, Tani had been teased and bullied by the grandchildren made me angry. Even in the few hours I had been around them since I got back, I could tell that our boys were troubled by life at home. They understood what was going on, and they knew that their cousins, aunts, and grandma were rejecting them. I tried to encourage them, telling them now that I had concluded my business in Nigeria, we would soon be able to move on with our lives. We will get our own place, and everything will be fine. When? Asked Tani. These things take time in America. We need to be able to work first. But soon, I promise. Just a few more months. It did not take long for me to realize that we did not have months of grace left in the house. Within minutes of seeing Grandma again for the first time, I knew that we had to go much, much sooner. I tried telling her about the success of my trip and how we now had enough money to hire a lawyer who could represent us and help us secure the proper authorization to find work and then get an apartment of our own. My words were worthless. She brushed them aside with her hand and left. I had to steady myself before I went back into the bedroom to tell Aloud. When I finished talking, she looked just as shocked as I felt. When you offer an invitation to family members to come stay with you in Nigeria, you assume that they will remain for some time. Not days, weeks, or even months. When you open your home to family, you expect that they will be with you for years. Perhaps even forever. The only thing that is not unclear is the fact that the invitation has no expiration date. Family is family, blood is blood, and home is home. As a child, I grew up surrounded by family members, cousins, and aunts and uncles, as well as the couple who rented a room and were soon adopted into our family. My dad would never allow any of his children to say, "This is my house." We shared whatever we had, and that was all that was to be said on the matter. In more than 40 years of living in Nigeria, neither I nor Aloud had ever heard of anyone asking anyone who was family to leave. Even though we knew that we should expect things in America to be different from Nigeria, it still hurt. In a way, it was a deeper cut than being chased by Boko Haram. At least we expected the militant Islamists to hate us, to want to drive us from their land, or even to kill us. But family? This feeling that I had of being rejected by someone who was supposed to love and care for us was a deep wound. And it was a wound that seemed to me as though it had grown too deep to heal. We tried talking to Uncle, and he said he would try and fix everything for us, but we knew that he was unlikely to succeed. Grandma was not Yoruba, not even Nigerian. How could we expect her to behave like one? And so I dedicated myself to a new task of finding a home as quickly as I possibly could. At first, I looked in Dallas. I hoped that I could find a small place to live and a low-paying job and move out. It was no use. With no employer, no citizenship, and nothing more than the $5,000 I had brought back from Nigeria, a sum that I soon came to realize was not nearly as impressive in America as it was back home. I was told again and again that there was nothing anyone could do to help. Every door I tried remained firmly locked. I pressed on. I contacted every person I could think of who lived in America. I approached friends I had not had contact with for years, telling them about our situation and begging them for help. With each hour that passed and each message I received informing me that there was nothing anyone could do, the pressure increased. The greater the pressure, the more and more desperate I felt. It was as if we were facing an executioner, and he was already loading the bullets into his gun. There was one choice still open to us. We could return to Nigeria. Even though my own trip back had been uneventful, I never once considered abandoning America and taking the family back. In many ways, we had even less freedom living under Grandma's roof than we did under our own in Abuja. We had surrendered our independence twice, and neither of us liked it. Both Oluwatoyin and I agreed that by far the most important thing was the boys' future. We wanted them to grow up somewhere they would be safe, where they would be able to thrive, where they would be able to work hard and enjoy the rewards. We would do whatever it took to make that happen. No matter how low we would have to stoop or how hard we would have to work, we agreed that we had been blessed to make it to America, and there was no way we were going to voluntarily walk away from it. I had given Grandma a deadline of when we would leave, but it approached with alarming speed. With 3 days remaining, I was searching on Facebook for any contacts I might have overlooked. I found someone I was in high school with who was now living in Atlanta. I told him the same story I had told everyone, how we had been forced to leave Nigeria, and now, after 5 months of living in Dallas, we urgently needed a place to live and a job. "Yes," he replied. "You may come and stay with me for a month. I can find you work, but I do not have room for your family. Leave them in Dallas until you are ready to move into a place of your own." It was a kind gesture, and I appreciated his offer, but leaving Oluwatoyin and the boys at Grandma's house was not an option. So I declined, thanked him greatly, and went back to scrolling through endless pages of friends, desperately hoping that I might see someone I had overlooked. With 2 days to go, I did. Olufemi was a school friend of mine from senior year, now living in New York. I sent a friend request, hoping he would respond quickly. Within the hour he had accepted, and I messaged him with my urgent request, "Please, can you help me? I am living in Dallas but have to leave by the weekend." I added some more details, pressed send, and prayed. His reply was swift and clear. "Our home is not big, but you are welcome to come with your whole family. And I would like to introduce you to my pastor, Pastor Philip. He will help you." 1 week after I arrived back in Dallas, we were ready to head back to the bus station again. Grandma was tired that morning, too tired to do anything more than come to her bedroom door, quickly say goodbye, and disappear again. Uncle drove us, and before we had backed into the street from the driveway, he was already apologizing. "You know what we men are like," he said. "We're so proud and don't like to admit when we're wrong. But I'm so sorry about all this. I'm sorry that I couldn't keep everyone happy. Sorry that I couldn't keep you here. And Grandma's sorry about this too. She really is." "Uncle," I said, "we appreciate your words and your love for us, but you do not have to feel bad. We have never questioned your kindness or love, and we are grateful for your mighty gift of allowing us to stay in your home for 5 months." It was quiet in the car, and I weighed my next words carefully. "We were strangers to you. Yet you embraced us and gave us a home. We know that it has not been easy. We understand. I'll take care of it, Uncle added as we pulled into the bus station. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of everything. I did not know quite what he meant by that or how to respond to his words. Oluwatoyin embraced him for a long time. Eventually, when it was time to board the bus, we said goodbye. The road north was familiar now. I recognized the farms and forests, and I no longer sat and stared, amazed at how ordered the environment was or how smooth the roads were. Instead, I barely looked outside the window as we drove. I was lost in my own thoughts, caught between two different feelings. I was frustrated that I had wasted almost 5 months in America. In all that time, I had not been able to do a single day's work. I had built no foundation for my family and made no progress toward a better, stronger life. But that was not all. I had to remind myself. We were safe, we were free, and we were heading to New York. I leaned over to Oluwatoyin and whispered the words that were growing louder and louder inside me. Now life really starts.